There we go. Live for NFL week number 2 here on Right Angle Sports YouTube. Hope everybody's having a fantastic start to their Wednesday morning. The fresh coffee is in tow, and we're ready to talk all things NFL week number 2 here on the live stream. Appreciate all of those who have joined in already. Looks like about 100 folks here on a Wednesday morning. So that's fantastic. We did this last Monday evening, holiday Monday, to kick off week 1. Let me know in the comments, guys. What time do you like better? What time do you prefer? Kind of debating between both. At least here you kind of have the injury reports coming out. You have a good sense of what's going on. Monday night, maybe a little bit early. So always appreciate input on that as we did on Monday. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. I'm going to press you all show 4 questions. I'm going to try to encourage more. So if you want to get your pass and get out of the way of any criticism for not submitting the questions, go ahead on the YouTube app and submit those right now. We'll try to keep a little more format to this. Last week ended up just being a free-flow rant for an hour and a half. Let's hit the games as we go. And we'll start off with Thursday night football. Minnesota Vikings on the road at the Philadelphia Eagles. We are seeing the numbers currently. Eagles, a cheap 7-point favorite, -05 at Chris, -103 at Pinnacle. 7 flat almost everywhere else across the board. And the total right now, 48.5. I don't know how this isn't a look to the over for everybody within this spot. Even with this ticking up just a little bit to 49, even if you're seeing 48.5, bet online, Chris. Kevin O'Connell's just like the ultimate chase head coach, and you kind of saw it emerge, even somewhat against the Buccaneers. There were some quirky things within that. The Vikings had a couple drives inside the 5, stall out. Kirk threw the interception at the goal line. There were only 6 possessions all game. There were comments after about how those 2 drives to start the second half really kind of took everything out of the game. There was 18 minutes of drives, and both teams only got 1 possession. And so, the game just completely fell flat. But both of these teams, 3 and 4 in pass rate over expectation for week 1. And again, that it adjusts for game state within that number. So you had both teams throwing a lot. The Eagles faced just a heck of a game plan from Belichick, who really went out of his way to put an end to the mobile QB stuff. I just look at this as a Thursday night game that could have a lot of scoring and a lot of points. And so this has ticked up a little bit. I don't know if it's gone fully far enough yet, but that's kind of my take within this. Did Minnesota use a lot of pre-snap motion or none? I actually don't know. The SIS numbers have been really slow to update, and there's been some people saying that there's been issues with them. So I've had some difficulty with those as well. Wilkman brings up a good point. Primetime Kirk, we're going to hear all about it, right? About how he struggles. And certainly you can point to the Eagles' defensive line in this one as a negative and the pressure they're going to be able to generate. We saw them with like a 42, 43% pressure rate, and they only blitzed 22, 23% of the time in week 1, and they just lived in the backfield. Part of that, though, was the Pats playing without their 2 starting guards. So they're missing 2 huge pieces on their offensive line. So that didn't help. Now, the Vikings have injury issues of their own on the offensive line, so that'll be important. But I just think O'Connell wants to get everything opened up as quickly as possible. So really think that the Thursday night football tomorrow, we could see a lot of points within that one. Prop look to Goddard, anytime touchdown, I think might be interesting. It's like plus 260. He wasn't too happy with how he was excluded from that game plan in week 1. Got a question on Twitter, came in. He's not in the chat. Which sportsbook opens up odds first for NFL? Circa opens first for college. For week 2, we saw FanDuel and Chris right around 4:30 p.m. Pacific. I'm a Pacific time zone guy now, so it's a big adjustment trying to figure out what time it actually is. But FanDuel and Chris were kind of battling to go first for who posted their numbers. Last year, Bet Online went really, really early with a lot of their stuff. This week, they were about 20 minutes later. So usually it comes from one of those 3 places. We're seeing a lot more places post look-ahead lines now the week prior. So that's something to consider as well. I'm going to try keep up and organize all these questions. A lot about the Dallas game, which we'll get to. That's a fun one to talk about. Appreciate all the questions keeping coming in. Jordan Pago says, PST much better for watching late games. It's weird because the day finishes at like 8:30 with these primetime games. I'm a mountain time zone guy originally, so I'm adjusting to that a little bit. But I find that every morning I start and I'm immediately behind everyone else work-wise because you have that 3-hour delay, which sucks. And so that's a big sort of difference to go through. Scott D, are you giving out a pick here? No, I'm just sharing my thoughts as we go. We'll have anything official from the service through the site or the release shows, but I have comments as we go throughout the game. So if you have anything specific you want to know, let me know. Moving on to Sunday, Chargers on the road at the Titans. LA, a 3-point favorite. I think this 3 is going to get a little bit bigger. The Titans were getting money in week 1 against the Saints. We saw that number come down. They were competitive, but I think that was more a play against the Saints than it was a true play on the Titans. Tennessee still figuring out their backfield and what they want there. We saw Spears out-snap Henry, which was quite interesting. Henry's prop numbers were as low as I ever remember seeing them, closed around 78. He's usually a mid-90s guy. So there's a transition there, but just didn't see a lot from the Titans offense against that Saints defense. And what I did notice from the Titans defense, Carr led the league in week 1 for intended air yards from quarterbacks. He was really willing to throw deep and had a lot of space. With the Chargers, it was the opposite of what everyone expected from Moore. Everyone thought it was going to be this deep downfield passing attack. There were a lot of short underneath throws. Part of that was likely the Fangio defensive scheme, how he likes to keep everything in front, really disguised looks post-snap. And so that took away from a lot of the play action stuff. But we just saw a huge emphasis on the run for the Chargers all game long against that defense. Now, that could certainly change with Eckler removed from the picture. He's very likely to miss. So maybe that forces a lot more throwing from the Chargers. So that's something that I would keep my eye on when you're looking at the total or potentially backing LA. If LA is forced to pass more, that's what everybody wants because of the injuries in the backfield. That could be a pretty different miss. Do you think Eckler, do you think it matters if Eckler misses, or do they not miss much with Kelly as the backup, asks Biscuit? I thought Kelly looked really, really good. I think he's going to get a lot of time as the season progresses. I just think it's going to turn this Chargers team into a little bit more pass first if Eckler misses, because they're only going to have sort of the one true option in the backfield. It's not going to be a split between the two overall. So that's sort of my stance there with the Chargers. So I think that side increases a little bit as the week goes on. Packers on the road at the Falcons. Green Bay, 1.5-point favorite. We're seeing 2 at Chris, 2 at DK as well, which is interesting. Total got bet down from 42.5 to 40.5. Saw some Packers questions. Adam Orphan. Good to see you, Adam. The Green Bay flip is quite interesting with injury health news coming out of week 1 games. Curious what we leaned as the practice reports come in. That is grammar and spelling top notch on a Wednesday morning, Adam. You're feeling well out there in the Arizona heat. So the loss of Aaron Jones is significant for Green Bay. He's trending towards not playing. Christian Watson did an interview on Monday afternoon, and he didn't say he was going on IR. He said he was avoiding it. The wording that he used specifically was he doesn't think that he needs IR. So if you hear a wide receiver saying he doesn't think he needs IR, it probably means he's not close to 100% when you're looking at a game 5 days out from the time of that interview taking place. It probably would have been an adamant disagreement within that. And so obviously that could change. But as you're looking at this game right now, you'd have to sort of speculate that both Jones and Watson are going to miss. You also have the Quay Walker injury on the defensive side in the middle of the field. So there's a lot of injury issues for Green Bay within this matchup. On the other side, Atlanta just about 15 minutes ago said Patterson is practicing and Jeff Okudah is also practicing as well. So the Falcons are operating essentially at full health. I don't know why this number has gone as far as it has, because I don't agree with the Packers looking nearly as good as what that scoreboard indicated against Chicago. That was a really close game at half, got out of control late. That's kind of become the MO of the Chicago defense dating back about 10 weeks since they made all those trades in the 2022 regular season. And so, again, there was a lot of just big plays, missed tackles. The whole offense was running through Jones. You take him away, you still don't have Watson. What are you getting from this Packers offense, which, again, in the first half against Chicago, really bad defense, struggled, and now you get a much better unit with Atlanta. Obviously, the under makes sense. That's why that number's come down. We saw a ridiculously high run rate relative to expectation from Atlanta, and you think those offensive weapons for Green Bay are limited. The stat that blew my mind was Ritter last week against the Panthers defense that lost their best defensive back early in the game. There were 90% of snaps had a route run by Drake London on dropbacks. He wasn't targeted, which is bizarre when you don't target your number one receiver. But 2, Desmond Ritter's average throw was 8.5 yards behind the sticks. So it shows how conservative this entire Falcons offense is. So that's a pretty interesting look in its own right. Adam, you got a pass. Not my strongest. Sweet, is it? There we go. Your spelling continues to get better overall. Matthew Roseburn, can Atlanta keep the volume of both Algier and Robinson at running back? Well, I don't think anyone expected Algier to get the bulk that he did in week 1. So I think that was an interesting surprise. What are we going to get from Robinson? I think it's really hard to predict what you're going to get from this Atlanta offense week to week, with Smith being a guy that just changes it up so much. So that's a pretty interesting look. I'm going to grab the window 1 second. We've got a recent move into BC, and there's all sorts of noise all day going on. So that's pardon the interruption there. Indianapolis Colts on the road at the Houston Texans. Indy, a 1-point favorite, total at 39.5. Injuries all over the place for Houston starting to emerge. Was not impressed at all by what I saw with that offense. CJ Stroud, again, I had high expectations with him and Bobby Slowick. It was ugly. Part of that was on the road at Baltimore. But still, I think there's nothing but problems for this Houston offense. Indy was an interesting sort of back and forth all game, integrating Richardson into the whole offense. They kept him out late in the game at the goal line due to precautions. He took a big hit to his non-throwing shoulder. He's going to be fine in play. When you're looking at an anytime touchdown price, considering the mess in the backfield that they have going on, where they may be down to running back number 4, Deion Jackson just didn't look like he is a full-time running back in the NFL. If Richardson is going to be more involved and get the bulk of the carries, he was around plus 180 last week, anytime touchdown. That came down, but keep an eye on that. When you think about how much Steichen uses his quarterbacks in the run game, he should be warranting a price around even money, and we're just not going to see that. And so check your sports books for that one. That would be the take there. Grayson, no take on Nico Collins. He hit the injury report. I don't know the extent of that. But not much of a take there with that Houston offense and Nico Collins. Ryan Roberts, seems Richardson and only Richardson for anyone in this game to do anything. It's not a bad assessment overall when you're just putting it in a 1-sentence take like that. Seattle Seahawks on the road at the Detroit Lions. Fun one. Lions, a 5.5-point favorite at FanDuel, 6 at Chris, 6 at Circa, Pinnacle as well. 5.5 a couple places elsewhere. Total in this one has come down. We had a release on that. Under was as high as 52.5. It's now 46.5 at Pinnacle and continuing to trend down. Lots of questions coming in. So Gerald Morris, as a Seahawk fan, it kills me, but how poorly we played. How does Detroit not kill Seattle and cover the 7? This was, for years, I would say a game that I would be running to bet Seattle, because the look ahead here was 3, gets up to 6. If you just play this out, you have a spot where the Lions on Thursday Night Football, in the game everyone's watching, look really good against the Kansas City Chiefs. They get the win. They get the bump in the next week. Seattle, in a game, again, that was semi-isolated within the afternoon, really underperform against the Rams, a game within the division where both teams know each other well. Now you get that big inflation. You can look at so many cases where the Lions is a dog, now going to a favorite. It's a big role change. It's like all of these classic spots would lead me to Seattle. However, I really think that there's a big issue with the Seahawks offense at the moment. Last year, towards the end of the season, the numbers across the board really trended downwards. Issues with Geno, coverages were figuring him out. And we really saw, again, at halftime, the Rams make the adjustment. All of a sudden, Geno in this offense, 1 first down in the second half. You have both starting tackles for the Seahawks very likely to miss this game. If they were both healthy, the Seahawks aren't scrambling to sign 41-year-old and 400-pound Jason Peters to come represent some sort of semblance of a offensive lineman at some point within this game. it's just getting bad to worse for Seattle. And there were these high expectations. I still see some opportunity for like a guy like Metcalf within the red zone, like he did in week 1, to shine through. But I don't know if this team is in a right spot now where they can go on the road without their tackles, face this Lions pass rush. And again, you flip it around, the Lions O-line looked great against KC. Sure, there's no Chris Jones. This Seahawks defensive line isn't any better. Blitz 30% of the time, they generated pressure on less than 10% of snaps. Against the Rams O-line, they didn't know who the starters were a week before kickoff. Boy, I think it's ugly for Seattle. So usually I'd be like, I want to bet Seattle in this spot. I certainly can't do it this week. I actually like the Lions. I think it could be ugly for Seattle going forward. So no Seahawks for me in this one. And I think as a Seahawks fan, there's reason to be concerned about this offense. Bears on the road at the Buccaneers. Tampa Bay, a 3-point favorite with a total of 41. Bears offense just exploded again. Gave up a ton of big plays to Green Bay. Couldn't stop Aaron Jones. Was just ugly all around in the second half. Offensively, part of DJ Moore no showing was definitely Jair Alexander and his presence on the field. They got no help from Chase Claypool, who was just operating at 30%. Some of the film coming back and the quotes on that were just ugly. This offense got a lot of hype because of one completed screen pass in the preseason in week 1 against the Titans backups, and they just no-showed in that game against Green Bay. Interesting stuff today about how the Buccaneers, Rachaad White specifically, said that they figured out the Vikings defensive signals and knew exactly what was coming, which is what led them to have those 2 huge long drives in the second half that completely killed the game. So that's probably not going to happen and be replicated again, but you're not going to have Mayfield in this offense pressured like what you got from Flores, who was blitzing 50% of snaps in week 1. So it's going to be a very different look. So a much different scenario for the Buccaneers. I'll say maybe I'm a little bit surprised this total has come down a little bit. Again, I just think that Buccaneers-Vikings game didn't reflect what that score ultimately was. There was a very sharp group playing the under late in the week, and that move certainly happened and was significant. But I think this is going to be a different game for the Bucs offense all around. Menace thinks the Bears are the play. Would be curious to know why. Sausy on the other side says he loves the Bucs. And then you're wondering if this line holds all week. Well, there you go. You kind of have a split between the two just here in the chat. Probably going to be pretty split elsewhere with all that Chicago hype. Raiders on the road at the Bills. Had a question pre-show, which was really, really interesting. I thought I'm trying to find it right now. Not pulling it up at the moment. But it was a question about the Bills and do they bounce back from what we saw on Monday night? I think what we saw on Monday night was 2 different situations sort of unfolding within once. First and foremost, it was a Jets defense after the injury with all that sort of emotional turmoil that occurred, playing way out of their minds. That's a very, very good Jets defense. But so often we see the big quarterback go down and then everyone else on the team steps up. I think that certainly was the case with how the Jets played. 2, we saw the Bills' offensive system completely shift from what we saw a season ago. We knew Ken Dorsey was going to go to more heavy personnel, use more tight ends. That's why they drafted Kincaid. But he led the league in terms of play calls with 2 tight ends or more on the field for all teams in week 1 this season. Last year, the Bills used it at one of the 3 lowest rates. And so it was a huge shift for how the Bills offense looks. Josh Allen throwing into those coverages for the Jets, not a good situation. And so everything kind of came together all at once. The Jets defense matched up very well against the Bills both games last year. They saw the switch coming this year. I think that matters. The Raiders, on the other hand, that was a very quirky game against the Broncos where Denver was moving the ball. The Raiders sat in 2 deep coverage. Peyton was talking about how the Raiders kind of doing the same thing, forcing everything underneath. If you think about what the Bills are doing, the change, it's to counter those looks. The Raiders are not going to be able to play the Bills in any sort of man or straight up fashion. They're going to have to sit in that same look. So I think Dorsey and this offense really know what's coming from the Raiders this week and will look much better on offense I think we're going to see a lot more running from Allen, a lot more running from Cook, and that's going to free things up down the field as they switch Kincaid into more of a slot role. He got a lot of slot usage in week 1, but that's really going to work against this Raiders defense. And so I think it's going to be a much better looking Bills offense. You have Jimmy G going on the road to face the Bills defense in this environment. I think that's going to be a tough task. So I think the number is right at 9.5 where it is. I wish this didn't tick up a little bit and we could have had the Bills in teasers, but that's not going to be a reality as this number is going to hang up there. There is an 8.5 at DK still sitting around, but I don't think that's going to last for long. Connor says that's a great spot for the Bills, and I would be inclined to agree with that as well. Chiefs on the road at the Jags. Obviously, two big things going on here from the Chiefs side. Chris Jones signs the deal. He now faces an offensive line that won't have Brandon Sheriff. The best remaining offensive lineman for the Jags is hurt. He's very likely to miss time. Doug Peterson said in an interview on Monday that it is going to be a very big test for the Jags if Sheriff doesn't go. Very much looks like he won't. That's problematic. So that's a big win for the Chiefs defense that looked really good against the Lions offense on week 1. It was the only time in the Mahomes-Reed era where the Chiefs defense held an opposing offense to 14 points or less that the Chiefs lost. The last time that happened to an Andy Reid Chiefs team was with Alex Smith. You have to go back 6.5 seasons to find that. So that puts into perspective how well Spags and the Chiefs defense did without their top guy on the D line, and now they get a much easier matchup of opposing offensive line. On the other side, let's see what happens with Travis Kelce. We've heard all week about the receivers and their struggles for Kansas City. He's going to go a long way to sort of freeing a lot of that up. I don't think there's a situation where the Chiefs wide receivers can look that bad again. The drops were just ridiculous. And so that certainly factored in to that game in a huge way. But again, it's a much easier matchup of opposing defense. The Colts at times were pretty comfortably moving the football on this Jags defense. Certainly think the Chiefs can do the same. So 3 key injuries or players of note that are going to go a long way to determining this matchup. Number-wise, this was 10 in the playoffs. That game was in KC. We're now down to 3. People are going to say the playoffs take on a different sort of light in terms of price and stuff, and I agree with that. Discussed that exact same thing with Rob Pizzola yesterday. What I would say with this is if you want a direct sort of comparison to how these teams have adjusted hype-wise, the Cowboys closed 10.5 against the Giants late last season as well. They closed 3 on Sunday Night Football. I'm not saying this is going to play out in the same way, but in terms of where we have these teams and these adjustments, we've seen some pretty significant shifts late last season to this year, not just in this game, but others already as well that I don't necessarily fully agree with. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking this. Ryan Roberts says, Mahomes as a short favorite seems very hard to say no to. Forget what the stats on that are. I don't have that off the top of my head, but I feel like any Patrick Mahomes stats in a situation look really, really good because they just win so many games. Jags 1-4 off a double-digit win. I know trends don't pay the bills, but I'm on KC -3 with Jones and Kelce back in the mix. A lot to say about the 1-0 versus 0-1 teams, and this is something that would fit that category as well. Baltimore on the road at Cincinnati. Last game of the early slate within the rotation order. 3.5 is the number for Cincinnati across the screen with a total of 46.5. Can also see it as low as 46. Big injuries for Baltimore. Most injured team in the NFL. 4 of their highest paid players are hurt. Williams as well as Humphrey in the defensive backfield. You can't overstate the importance of those losses. Looks like both guys are going to miss. Harbaugh said on Monday, Humphrey has a shot, was the terminology he used to describe it. This is a pissed-off Bengals wide receiver room that was just miserable after that game in the press conferences. And now they get to face a team they've had a lot of success against that is going to be without their 2 best defenders. That's point number 1 in favor of Cincinnati, why this number has begun to move. On the other side, the Ravens, Stanley and Linderbaum, left tackle and center, both likely to miss this game as well. What we saw in the opener against a solid Houston Texans defense coached by D'Amico Ryans was a Ravens team that was very much adjusting to a new offensive system with a lot of blocking scheme changes up front. Lamar Jackson had 2 designed runs the whole game. That kind of illustrates the changes that this Ravens team is going through. Less than 5 yards per play against that Houston Texans defense. Now you take 2 key offensive linemen potentially out of the picture, and you're putting them against a good Bengals defensive line within the division in a matchup that benefits Cincinnati very well in recent matchups. That's a tall task. So that's why we're seeing this number move out a little bit further. I'm surprised the total hasn't gone higher than what it is, considering those injuries. And I don't think that Burrow, within that week 1 matchup and how much he struggled, they've always had issues with the Browns defense, which take on a very different look this year. We'll get to that game at the end of the board. I don't think we see Burrow look anywhere close to that bad ever again. Less than 3 yards per play. It was his worst game in his career. I think that's going to be very, very different. If you're hearing the jackhammer in the microphone, let me know in the comments. But please, guys, keep the questions coming. More than 275 on the stream. I might have to go close another door as this seems to be getting even closer. So let me know in the chat if that's getting too loud. Let's move on to the afternoon slate. Giants on the road at the Cardinals. We sent out good one here. Is Kelsey announced in? Do you think this line goes to 3.5 or higher? Yes, I think it goes to 3.5. Glad you can't hear the jackhammer. Giants on the road at the Cardinals. We released Giants -4. This is out to 5.5 or 6. This personally was my favorite look of the entire week 2 card from a side perspective. And so I'm glad there was consensus within the team. Daboll and Kafka looked as bad as they could possibly look week 1 against the Cowboys. It was raining. It was ugly. That game was over midway through the first quarter. I think in many ways, much like that Browns-Bengals game was, in many ways, it's a throwaway. We'll put that on the side. What I saw from the Cardinals in a game I watched every snap of against the Commanders was a defense under Jonathan Gannon that's taken on a very different look. When he got the job for Arizona, he said he wanted a defense full of killers. That's a very different tone and mentality for a Gannon defense. And I mean, these guys for Arizona were overplaying every single possible route. They were overplaying everything on the edge. They were biting on the few fakes that Washington was mixing into their offense. And it was a Commanders offense that was extremely conservative in how they were calling plays, especially in the second half. They called 1 pass play in the final 12 and a half minutes. There was this emphasis for Washington to really win that game, new ownership. And we saw Bieniemy in his first game as an in that spot for Washington really tighten up. We saw Rivera tighten up. So this Cardinals defense, although they got some big plays and turnovers, it just wasn't tested late. I think Daboll and Kafka, watching what this Cardinals defense did with all the stuff they do pre-snap, with all the motion they have, are going to create so many mismatches and get so many guys out of position that the Giants are going to be able to move the ball up and down the field all day. And so I think it's a big rebound spot for the Giants. I really like this one. We're absolutely at the edge here of what you could lay with them. I wouldn't be advocating for the 6 at 5.5 versus the 4 we sent out. Still a very, very little bit of wiggle room within that, but I think it's a big game for the Giants, a big bounce back. Morgan, I think Darren Waller has a huge game as well. Didn't look like those injury reports around them were too limiting within that game. It was just the fact that the weather and the situation against a very, very good Cowboys defense was limiting all around. So I think that there's a big bounce back for the Giants in this spot. 49ers on the road at the Rams. Really strong opinion on this one, too. The Rams on field between Kyron Williams, Tutu Atwell, Puka Nacua, which I've butchered his name 18 times this week already in media. All of those guys are just tiny. Cam Akers is tiny. This is such a small offense. And if you watch the broadcast, there's multiple times that it was referenced where they had to motion Atwell multiple times pre-snap to set him up in situations because he can't separate off the line when he's getting jammed in coverage. They're now going against, from week 1, a Seahawks defense with a 30th ranked defensive line that couldn't generate pressure, that was missing Jamal Adams, that was missing Witherspoon in the secondary, that they found a lot of space against, getting very, very creative. They go from that to just this 49ers defense, which is the most aggressively and physically intimidating that there is in the league. it is such a stark contrasted difference that I think that the Rams offense is really, really going to struggle. Again, we talked about the Seahawks earlier. The Rams defense got a lot of benefits from within that. We saw Purdy and the ones for San Francisco look good in the preseason. Obviously, they looked incredible against a very, very good and very physical Steelers defense. A massive step down in class when you're looking at what they're going to face here with the Rams. And so I think we're going to see that size difference and physicality difference really show through. And I think we see the Niners look really good again. Obviously, at 8, teaser leg. Ideally, you're not teasing the road favorites down from the traditional Wong strategy, but I think you're more than fine teasing the Niners down within this game. Jets on the road at the Cowboys. Here we go. Fun one, guys. Lots of questions for here. I'll scroll up to the top. Devin Barth, a loyal viewer of all the shows. Are you surprised by all the Cowboys love this week? Feel like 9.5 is too much to lay against our Jets defense, but could just be my heart speaking. John Williams, Dallas is going to be a big square play, I think. Curious to see what odds makers dole out to 10, and if they do it, how quickly it gets bought back, if at all. The RAS play was at 7, so 10 big value. We didn't have a play on this one, nor an official release. Michael Harvey, the boys will go off at 10. Okay. Let's start with, first of all, what we saw from the Jets. Obviously, you lose Aaron Rodgers. I watched another show with a couple guys in the space. They said the adjustment was 3.5. I think it's much closer to a touchdown, if not 7.5, 8 points. We were at 3. We're now at 9.5. You go through the 4, 6, and 7. I think the adjustment for Rodgers fully priced in. The Jets defense, as I mentioned, elevated quite a bit to play within that game against the Bills team that they knew very well. I think it's a much different task going on the road to face the Dallas Cowboys. Watch the injury report for the Cowboys offensive line. That's going to go a long way. I still think the Jets defense is really, really good. But I think that facing this Cowboys offense, which really didn't show much of anything that they had in the offseason integrated in that game against the Giants because of the weather conditions. I just think the Jets defense is not going to look nearly as good as they did on the short week coming off of that emotional win and game in overtime on Monday Night Football. Offensively, this is going to be a mess for Zach Wilson. Remember the Patriots game on Monday Night Football, the ghost game? It's going to be that repeated. This Dallas Cowboys their defensive front, with Dan Quinn is phenomenal. The secondary with Gilmore added in is such a huge upgrade. It frees everything else up in front. This is a mess for the Jets, guys. I know you can look at this and say the number's big. I think it's fully been adjusted. I wish we could have teased this, but this on both sides is just a bad matchup for the Jets off of that game. So I wish we could tease this. I wouldn't run to lay 9.5, 10, but I couldn't take the points with the Jets here. I think the Jets defense will keep them competitive in games late in the year, but I think this is going to be a tough one. I think we see another big win for the Cowboys, and then we'll really see what those Cowboys spreads do. So that's my stance on this. The Jets really need to find the quarterback answer. Zach Wilson's not going to be that. Washington on the road at Denver. Broncos 3.5-point favorites. Total in this one, a very short 38. Peyton had the key interview. He said that the second half was really, really weird. He said that they were stuck into taking everything underneath, which made me change my opinion. I thought that all the effort to throw to Williams and Pirine was him trying to replicate what he did with the Saints, with Kamara and other backs that he had. But it was actually just how the Raiders played them defensively and gave them no other choice. The loss of the tight end is going to be a big blow for the Broncos, who, of course, are without Judy, had other losses in the preseason as well. So what are we going to get from the Broncos and their wide receivers? I don't know why it's not clicking at all for this Broncos team. They have a lot of talent otherwhere. It's tough all the way around. So I wish I had a stronger take within this game to sort of advocate for taking the Broncos, because I would look at that 0-1 versus 1-0 situation at home with the Commanders traveling off of that big win where the ownership gets the big win, the enemy gets the big win, Howell gets the big win as the rookie. If the Arizona defense gave Howell and this Commanders offense some trouble, this Broncos defense is going to give them a whole lot worse. And I don't like that matchup for the Commanders offense whatsoever. But I struggle to see where the Broncos are going to be able to move the football a lot. Judy at best is 50-50 to play in this game. If that changes, I would change my tone. But I just think that the Broncos are so limited offensively. The prop situation is going to be interesting. P. Ryan didn't have any numbers posted last week. The Williams stuff got bet over initially by a few groups that were going really, really early, but late in week, all the pro money was on those Williams unders. So let's see where that number settles overall. But I would love to see if there's some P. Ryan stuff popping up, especially with the tight end injury. Sunday Night Football, Dolphins on the road at the Pats. This was initially smashed to the over. You can see why with Miami and how they played against the Chargers. Some very interesting stuff coming out about the McDaniels scheme adjustment season over season. We all know how sort of offensively intense he is as a play caller and play designer. I think he's going to be very interesting to watch in rematches specifically, as what he did against the Chargers in the rematch was really, really specifically tailored to what the Chargers took away in the previous meeting. Now, one of the Pats game was with a backup QB, and then one of them was very early. So there wasn't a lot to take away. That Pats defense looked so good against the Eagles. I think the Patriots are in a much better spot overall, but Miami and that offense, my God, McDaniel said he wants the fastest offense in the NFL. He has it. Absolutely, bar none, full stop. That offense is a lot of fun to watch and is going to be so tough to defend. For Belichick to go from taking away that mobile quarterback that's given him so much trouble and completely shut down Philly in week 1 to such a drastic switch here in week 2 is a really, really tall task. So I think Miami moves the football. I thought the Patriots offense without those guards up front on the offensive line looks really good. This is going to be a fun one to watch. I'm surprised to see the total come back. I thought it was going to, after the initial move to the over, stay up in that 47.5, 48 range. But we're now down to 46.5. David Rosansky watches a ton of the show. Letdown for Miami after the big win over LA, or too many injuries on the New England O-line to look at them? I don't think it's a letdown at all. I think you get another full effort all the way around. Sousy says, do you think Fangio's style of defense will benefit Max dink and dunk style of offense? I want to take the Pats if we see a 3, but unsure. I think the defense for Miami is going to take a little bit of time. The loss to Ramsey was huge. I think we saw the scheme changes and some of the benefits that it can have against the Chargers, forcing so much underneath and so much into the run. But I don't think that defense for Miami is fully there yet. I think that speaks to kind of why we saw that total early in the week get absolutely smashed to the over. Connor says he loves the Pats and teasers. Scary to take teasers against this Miami offense and how many points they can put up. 2 games to go. Monday Night Football. Saints on the road at the Panthers. New Orleans, a 3-point favorite, -15. I think that's a number that ticks up further. I think we actually see it come off of the 3 and get to the 3.5. I think there was a big play against the Panthers that has come through a couple times so far this week. Reasons here are really, really simple. You now today have the news, another offensive lineman down. So the Panthers are without their 2 starting guards. That's problematic in front of Bryce Young. You have the injury still to DJ Chark. You have no receivers that can find space or separate. You have an extremely slow group of skill players that simply can't get open. It's all a mess on the Panthers offense. On the defense, you lose your best defensive back in J.C. Horn. You still have Burns up front. What's going on there? How close to 100% is he going to be? It's ugly as it can be. And you also have this play caller dynamic within the Panthers where you have Frank Reich calling plays who skews conservative. Behind him, you have Thomas Brown, who skews much more aggressive and comes from the McVay system. Reich is holding on to play calling duties, trying to make things work. This is just such a misaligned team on both sides of the football. Money came against the Saints in favor of the Titans a week ago, so it's interesting to see the Saints get bet. But you take Horn out of the equation, you look at how deep Derek Carr was throwing downfield and how the offense looked quite okay at times for the Saints. I don't think the Panthers slowed them down. And then it's just a much more difficult defensive matchup for the Panthers, who now have more offensive injuries. And so could only look to play the Saints in this one at the 3. And then the Browns on the road at the Steelers, the true Monday Night Football game. Cleveland out to a 2.5-point favorite at FanDuel. Chris Circa as well. 2 -15 at BetOnline, the best price currently in the market, along with DraftKings. Total in this one, 39.5. This is a fun one. The defensive improvements and differences from Jim Schwartz for the Cleveland Browns are significant. Last year, below average blitz rate, a average pressure rate. What we saw from Jim Schwartz in week 1, way more blitzing, way more pressure. This is a loaded defensive front that you can put right up there with the likes of San Francisco for best in the league. I look at this as a spot where there's going to be a lot of people advocating to bet Pittsburgh. They're probably going to be that side that everyone looks at in a primetime game to back. The problem that I have with this is San Francisco didn't do anything crazy defensively to give Pittsburgh so many problems in week 1. I think Cleveland can do the exact same thing. I don't see a huge difference between what's up front for the Niners and how good this Browns pass rush is. What's Pittsburgh going to do to stop it? Especially now that you take Deontay Johnson out of the skill position lineup. Matt Canada was analyzed by a group of folks at The Athletic who were brilliant at watching film. And the conclusion was he just kept doing the same thing, and that was throwing at Fred Warner. Fred Warner is the best linebacker in the league. All of the criticism around Pittsburgh has been on Matt Canada's inability to change his game plan, make adjustments during the game, and attack the weaknesses of opposing defenses. In week 1 against the 49ers, he just went straight at the strength of what the 49ers have on defense and just kept trying to do it over and over and over again. The Steelers didn't have a first down until past the 2-minute warning in the second quarter on offense. And so, to me, I think the Browns can do and execute the exact same game plan the 49ers put on the field. What is Matt Canada going to shift into to change and do differently? I don't know if Pittsburgh has the answer in that regard. And on the other side, Nick Chubb was the one bright spot for the Browns offense, which I'm not fully sold on. But you take Hayward out of the middle of that defensive line, Chubb's going to be able to run pretty unrestricted. So we saw a huge shift to shotgun-based offense for the Browns. Maybe the weather held back that offense. It's been a long time now since we've seen much from Deshaun Watson. It's not like it's an easy task for him against the Steelers defense. But, boy, I sure couldn't look to back Pittsburgh in this one, despite it probably being labeled out as one of those spots that you would just assume that pros would jump on. So I don't agree with that overall. 42 minutes, better than an hour and 20 that we did last week. If there's any other questions to wrap up, get them in now. Otherwise, a quick update from our side. The Simple Handicap podcast is airing each and every morning. That is on Apple and Spotify, 10 to 12 minutes every morning. Market update, all the injury news, all the weather news. No pleasantries, no fluff. It's just a part of your morning routine. If you haven't listened to that, do so. The RAS app went live in the Google Play Store, but we're not openly promoting it yet because we have an update coming later this afternoon. So that'll be all set for everybody tomorrow. If you haven't already downloaded it on iOS, you can do so now in the Apple Store. Just search for the RAS app, Right Angle Sports. That'll be available. Lots of text content. Had about 10 posts last week, already a couple this week on injuries and more. We have a release show Saturday morning for college football. Got a very good one on that. That'll be at 11 a.m. Eastern. And then we have an NFL show, Redemption, 2-0 in the preseason, 0-2 in week 1 with the Steelers and the Warren prop, which were, I mean, you didn't even have to sweat it. But it was that bad. So there's a Redemption release show. NFL Week 2, Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern. There is a subscribe button and a like button down below if you enjoyed the podcast. And yes, Paul Enzo, we're removing the login. That's the updates. You'll no longer have to put in the number. You'll no longer have to create the username. You'll just be able to access the app and read all the content. So keep an eye out for that update tomorrow. And if you already have the app, go into your app store and you can update it as well. The Jeffries dark mode for RAS app. We'll do that next. That's actually been requested by a lot of people. So we'll get these out. We'll get it stable. We'll get it working, and we will go from there. 2 more before we wrap up. Can you break down QB rookies from Billy Cotton? What's your opinion so far of Stroud, Richardson, and Bryce Young? Stroud in the offense, worse than expected. Richardson in the offense, much better than expected. Bryce Young, indifferent. He's in a terrible situation with the lack of skill position players, with the offensive line injuries, and Frank Reich holding him back. So that's problematic. Really worried about Stroud in Houston, though, which is a big change for me from what I thought coming into the season just a couple weeks ago. B-Dub said he bet Vikings team total over 20.5 and 23.5 on the alternate. Let's get some points. I certainly think that you will get those points as well. Peter Lowe, RAS app for Android. It's up now, but wait till tomorrow to download it if you have the Android app. But you can find that now in the Google Play Store. All right, that's it. 45 minutes. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. Do this again next Wednesday at the same time, 9:15 a.m. Pacific. Enjoy your week, everybody. Chat to you tomorrow on the podcast.